No.
Good evening, and thank you for attending Breaking Through's next personal development session focused on name, image, and likeness. In recent months, the topic of name, image, and likeness within collegiate athletic circles has commanded attention of so many. It has fueled debate now from many of your conference rooms to coffee shops, all the way to Capitol Hill. For the foreseeable future, we'll have a heavy focus on collegiate athletic leaders in the industry. Tonight, we aim to provide you with some insightful information regarding NIL by some of the best minds in collegiate athletics. With that being said, I am Mark Hoover, the founder of Breaking Through. I'm a donor experience officer at UNC Charlotte, and I'm one of your moderators for this evening.
Thank you, Mark. And I'm Jesse Kasser, Director of Athletics Development at the University of South Carolina. And I partnered with Mark on Breaking Through and the panel discussion on name, image, and likeness this evening. Just so you all know, Mark's last panel, the future of college athletics development, I asked the team with Mark with Breaking Through to provide all of you, our peers, with pertinent information on relevant topics affecting our industry. So we thank our panelists and we thank our viewers for your time today.
Thanks, Jesse. Let's introduce you to our panel. From NC State, Boo Corrigan. Boo has served as the Director of Athletics at NC State since 2019 after 8 years as Director of Athletics at West Point. Corrigan was named the 2017 Athletic Director of the Year by NACDA and has held positions at Duke, Florida State, Notre Dame, and Virginia. Over his 2 years at the helm, NC State programs have won 7 ACC titles.
We also have from Charlotte, Chris Fuller. With a myriad of experiences from Syracuse to Tennessee, Chris has served Charlotte as the Deputy AD for External Operations since 2018. Chris brings over 30 years of experience within college athletics with a multitude of areas of expertise, from fundraising to marketing to ticket operations.
University of South Carolina, Eric Nichols. Having spent 13 years with the South Carolina Cocks, Eric currently serves as a Senior Associate AD Marketing and Branding and is the Chief Marketing Officer. Nichols oversees marketing, digital, and social media as the primary liaison for licensing, merchandise, sales, and outsourced entities such as Learfield. Nichols is currently working towards his PhD and has served as a 2015 NACMA president.
Also joining us on the panel this evening from the University of Minnesota, we have Jeremiah Carter. Jeremiah brings a former football student athlete perspective to the NIL conversation. It's also coupled with a background in compliance, as he currently serves as a director of compliance at Minnesota and has been doing so since 2015. Jeremiah has worked with the NCAA in various roles, including academic and membership affairs, and currently serves on the NCAA Division I Legislative Committee.
From Florida State, Michael Alford. A former baseball student athlete at Mississippi State, Michael currently serves as the president and CEO of the Seminole Booster Club at Florida State. Alford brings 26 years of intercollegiate athletics, professional sports, and TV broadcasting experience. Before joining Florida State, Michael held positions at Central Michigan as the director of athletics from 2017 to 2020, and has served in high-level roles at Oklahoma, the Dallas Cowboys, Alabama, ABC Broadcasting, the Cincinnati Bengals, and the University of Cincinnati.
And last but never least, from the University of Arkansas, we have Terry Prentice. Terry just recently came back home this past March to Fayetteville, serving as the Senior Associate AD for Athlete Brand Inclusive Excellence. Terry provides experience and leadership to prepare Razorback student athletes to maximize their opportunities related to name, image, likeness legislation. Terry also oversees diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. And as a former Razorback men's and track and field student athlete himself, he serves as the sport administrator for Razorback track and field.
Thanks, Jesse. So this evening, we'll be doing a show a little bit differently. We will have 3 segments that focus on name, image, and likeness, including the process behind NIL, the causes and effects of NIL, and the future of NIL in the collegiate athletic space. These segments will be filled with conversations from our panel that will last around 45 minutes. Then we will let our panel catch their breath and we'll open up the questions for the audience. Please submit those questions via the chat. Panel, as we mentioned, we very much encourage you to jump in with any thoughts or ideas or comments that may come top of mind as the conversation moves along. With that being said, let's get started. Boo, What is the NCAA's current stance on name imageness, and what will their governance over college athletics look like for it?
Well, Mark, first of all, I appreciate the introduction. I think it was a little too long, but and you left out the part about being a Chris Fuller fan. But I think a lot of where we are right now, to be honest with you, is you think back to February, March, and April when you're thinking that, hey, we're going to get something that's got some left and right limits on it, and we go through the Supreme Court with the Austin case, and lo and behold, we come out. I don't see a whole lot of left and right limits on this thing. And what we're really talking about is the idea of no inducement to a young person to attend your school and no pay for play. And not a whole lot around market value, not a whole lot around coaches' involvements, donors' involvement. So it feels a little bit like we're putting an airplane together while we're in the air. As we're going through this whole thing. And, I am all for the opportunity that our student athletes have in front of them and the ability for them to capitalize on the value that they bring to our institutions. And it's kind of trying to figure out, where does it start and where does it stop? And that's really where a lot of our discussions have been in the last couple of weeks, I guess, at this point, or call it 33 days. And each time we have a conversation, I go back, scratch my head a little bit and say, this is legal and we can do this and we can do that. And again, the answer repeatedly is yes. And we're trying to figure out what works best here at NC State, what works best for our roughly 560 student athletes, and find a way to do this in the most right way as we move forward.
Boo, it's interesting that you said, can we legally do this? Wow, we're actually allowed to do this, which in a lot of cases is kind of surprising. I look to Jeremiah with some NCAA experience and working in compliance. My question would be to you is, how does name, image, likeness look at Minnesota, and how does that differ across states and different universities? Please unmute yourself, Jeremy. There you go.
Yeah, sorry. It wouldn't let me unmute. Sorry about that. Yeah, I mean, to say that it's been a really crazy 3 months from a compliance perspective is an understatement. Boo used the term, trying to put an airplane together when we're flying. I was telling folks up to this that, usually we're helping answer a lot of questions and we're really charting a course for folks. And we were at the point, leading up to even June 25th, where we're saying, hey, I'm trying to help you navigate a ship, and I don't know the directions, and I don't even know the destination, right? And then all of a sudden, we got a flood of information all at once. The really interesting thing is how much it varies from state to state. I think in Minnesota, we're in a state where we don't have a state law. And we went from, in early June, kind of scrambling to say, oh no, we don't have a state law. And you saw many schools working with their state legislatures to get laws in place in the days and weeks leading up to July 1. And now we're at a point where honestly, we feel fortunate that we don't have a state law, because we're able to set our own policy and just move forward with our policy, as opposed to being in a state where there are state laws restricting it. And, if a student athlete violates our policy, they get a friendly reminder from us, as opposed to having violated state law. So it is very, it's a very unfamiliar space for everybody in college athletics to have not a common set of operating principles to be able to answer these types of questions.
So Chris, to piggyback on that, what are some of the questions that coaches and even student athletes come to you guys about throughout this entire process?
Yeah, Mark, I think Boo sort of touched on this a little bit. One of the hard things about this is the number of questions you can't directly, specifically answer, right? Um, I think all of us have gone through the use of marks part of this and how that's going to be viewed, and are you going to be strict? Are you going to be relaxed? I've had multiple schools call me and talk about product categories in their corporate partner family and how you're going to deal with that and how you're going to address it. So I do think, we get a lot of questions. I would tell you one thing that's been a little bit of an advantage for me versus some of my colleagues on the panel is, we're at a G5 school and it's a little bit different scenario. I would use the analogy of we're all on a train that's moving really fast, but I'm on a car near the back. So the Power Fives are having to answer these questions a lot more quickly than I might have to. And if I'm smart, I'll learn from their experiences as they go through. But yeah, I think we're all doing the best we can. Like many, we wrote our own guidelines after the NCAA came out with their interim guidelines on June 30th. We wrote our own because, like Jeremiah, we do not have a state law at this point either, like Boo for that matter as well.
Michael, for you, I'm curious as a development officer myself, what are you telling your team? I recently had the experience visiting a donor. They have a company and they wanted to, kind of like Barstool Sports, get players to, rep their company on social media. I don't believe I can broker such a connection. How are you leading your team, and what are you kind of telling them?
Well, it's interesting, Jesse, because, I was able to work on this for the past year and a half with the distinguished Mike Hill as leading, co-chairing the NIL Lead One. And then also he and I won a group of 6 with the NCAA. And I agree with you, some of the things that we recommended with the guardrails and just didn't happen at the end of the day with the low regulate. We're all for the low regulation model. But we also established the guardrail system for them by using, and I'm fortunate enough to have experience in NFL, and didn't have to reinvent the wheel with a third-party administrator that could tell you what define fair market value. But we chose not to go that way. But I'm sitting down a lot, and I'm fortunate, getting back to your question, I'm fortunate that I had to sit with Mike, and we had to talk to more congressmen and more groups over the last year and really analyze every state bill. And it's interesting here in Florida, which actually I think the Florida and the California are 2 of the best bills out there. But we cannot be involved right now. There's a gray area right now that we're getting cleared up from our governor, that if you're a board member or part of the athletic department or a DSO, you cannot be involved in that relationship or even connecting the two, is how we interpret it. So we're getting some clarification. But so right now, what we're telling our group, and we sent out a do's and don'ts, we're telling them that we can't be involved. Nobody associated with the department can be involved. You can DM an athlete. They're out there. Some of them have already gotten some NIL deals, but we're also educating them that by sponsoring an athlete, that is a business decision on you. You're not getting any benefits back from the university, whether it's donor points or anything along those lines. And really making sure we stress that home, that is a business decision and not one that's benefiting the university as a whole. And so we have really stressed that in some open forums to our donor base.
Kind of piggybacking off of that, And because there is this wild west and a lack of information of what's going on, I just want to kick it back to Jeremiah. State by state, and I might have read incorrectly, but is there certain states that allow universities to help broker those NIL deals?
Yeah, and I think the interesting thing is that there are two controlling pieces, right? One is a state law. And I would say that even if there is a state law where it's silent on whether or not the university can broker it, you know, the NCAA guidance that they have put out, while that's a really light touch, as light of a touch from the NCAA as I think we've ever seen, you know, one of the key bullet points from in their question and answer document is to specifically say that the university shouldn't be arranging or specifically cannot pay a student athlete for their name, image, and likeness. You know, it's something we'll get into in a little bit, but you know, the Title IX component of this is also a really big question mark when it comes to university involvement.
Well, that's a great segue, Terry. How does NIL affect Title IX, and if it does, what changes need to be done to Title IX?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. I've been thinking about it quite a bit, and I think, you know, several would agree, and I would hope it'd be the same on their campus. You know, a lot of our women's sports and those student athletes in those sports have had opportunities to take advantage of their NIL, and I think what we're learning is that additional opportunities come from those in ways that aren't tied to the sport necessarily, but they're TikTok opportunities, they're Instagram opportunities, they're mopeds and scooters and things along those lines that really aren't tied to how well they performed or how popular they necessarily are in relation to their sport, but it's been more tied to their profile on Instagram and how they carry themselves, really things that haven't been tied to their actual sport. So to that end, we've seen quite a bit of success with our women's sports, gymnastics, softball, volleyball, et cetera. But I think it's something we need to continue to be mindful of. We've rolled out our education to all of our student athletes. We engaged in a pilot program this summer with 50 student athletes and really drew the line 50-50 in terms of making sure that all of our women's programs were represented with the two participants, in addition to making sure that, you know, it wasn't just the football and men's basketball show, right? But no, I do think from an education standpoint, you certainly are going to need to ensure that things are equitable and that whatever your services are, whether you have a compliance officer running your NIL education or a student athlete development officer, you hire someone in-house, just ensuring that attention is continuing to be placed on those programs across the board. But from a business standpoint, Mark, honestly, the direction we've gone, we've really not been able to dictate to those, you know, donors and season ticket holders and boosters and fans who own those businesses. We haven't been able to tell them necessarily who they should select because that's not been our place. However, through all of our education and our open houses and forums and whatnot, we have shed a light on. We've got 465 great stories in our athletic department, and you know, we hope that you would decide to partner with all of our student athletes or make opportunities available to all of them. But from a Title IX specific standpoint, I think focusing on providing the best education we can across the board and attention to every student athlete across the board.
Thank you, Terry. And you know, you talk about businesses, and you know, I want to kick it to my esteemed colleague, Eric Nichols. You know, what's interesting about this panel is we have individuals on this panel with different backgrounds, from development, you know, to compliance, to marketing, like Eric. So, you know, Eric, I'd ask you, you know, obviously with sponsorships and things like that, and then how we're dealing with that in development from a marketing standpoint, how are you viewing name, image, likeness as a whole? And then here at the University of South Carolina, you know, what have we done to set ourselves up to be successful moving forward for us and our student athletes?
Sure. I'll answer the end, your last question first. I think some of the effort and spade that was done in the spring with our state law set us up for some success. While we're not the only ones that allow IP, we're one of the few that not only allow it but try to grease the spit so it can be attainable. And what I mean by that is we're taking a very offensive approach with our current partners that do have IP rights to make sure that they're educated, not through an email or text, but we're setting up a Zoom call, not unlike this. They can ask questions because this is such a unique time for them. They've been conditioned for years to touch student athletes. And now they just have a ton of questions. And by having IP with us, they can extend that IP to the student athlete. And we've already got one that's come through that's, they probably would not have gotten the deal had we not already had IP rights secured through that partner. On the flip side, I'm sure everyone on here is finding themselves doing what I did today of you're about to hit send on an approval, but then you have an epiphany. You're like, oh, wait a minute, I can't do that anymore. 35 days ago, I could have done it, but now I have to ask a new sets of questions. So getting out of our normal rhythm has been a little bit of a challenge, but it's all in all, obviously, it's really good.
Awesome. I'll leave this question pretty wide open, but it's probably more directed towards Michael. We've got a question from our audience. If schools can't be the one that hoopers deals between student athletes and businesses, how do schools plan to use their own in-house NIL programs? For example, Florida State's Apex program. And that's a question from Austin from the Durante Forum.
Yes, we set up our Apex program, and it was interesting because, again, I had the advantage of being able to study what other schools were doing when they sent them in. But we set it up as an educational model. We really partnered with our business school and entrepreneurship school on campus to not only educate our student athletes, but educate the student body. We said this is classes that not only athletes need to be taken, but students need to be taken about how to brand themselves, because everyone's going to be looking for a job after school is how we positioned it. And for them to grow their own brand, whether you're a finance major, on how am I going to present myself to Morgan Stanley when I'm finished here in college, and go back and how am I going to grow and put out the right things on social media. So we're using it, really the Apex program, working across campus, bringing in businesses also as educational tools to educate our students on how to best present themselves, present their brand, but then also bringing in people to show them how they grow their social media influence so that they are more valuable, which would go back to the TPA that would measure social media influence and tell you what someone's value is worth. But we're educating them on all those factors. And that's basically how we set up the Apex program.
Jeremiah, I want to get back to something you were discussing earlier. We're talking about individual universities without state legislation, universities with state legislation. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that this got kicked down the line in NCAA, looking towards federal legislation to help govern this deal. Where are we with federal legislation, if anywhere? And is that something that's going to be coming down the pipeline in the near future?
Yeah. Well, if I could answer that with any certainty, I think I would need to get into the prognostication business. But I think where we ended up, right? There was a rush to try and get something done before July 1 to preempt the state legislation. When it was clear that that didn't happen, I think the NCAA moved their tact to basically saying, all right, we're going to open it up. We're going to see where the problems are, and then we're going to try and address those problems. We still have a big issue of antitrust legislation and a number of other things that the NCAA needs to tackle, and they need the federal government's help to get that done. And I think that the tactic that they're taking right now is let's see what comes out there. Let's see where the pain points are for people in the general public, and where the pain points are for our legislators to try and move forward with that. We're at a point, Democrats and Republicans agree on nothing except for the fact that they dislike the way that the NCAA does business, right? That's the one common point that we've found in the last year. So the question is, how can the NCAA work with people to get things accomplished where we are protecting student athlete safety, where we're providing them with opportunities, and really getting back to the narrative of, look at all that we do for student athletes, right? The student athletes are better off being student athletes than they are without it. And we have to find a way to get back to that narrative with facts and with information to the legislators, so that we can get back on the same page and try and move forward and get to a point where we're not getting sued every week. Frankly, we need to get to a point where the NCAA is not getting sued every week, because the NCAA can't afford it, institutions can't afford it, and we need the federal government's help to do that.
So, directed to you, Northwestern tried to unionize the match. Does that come into play with lawsuits like Jeremiah said, and with NIL going forward? Is that a possibility?
Sure. I think anything's a possibility. And Jeremiah, if you can tell me what's going to happen nationally, give me a call first. I'm all in. All right. And as you talk about it, is the NCAA the right entity as it's currently constructed to deal with everything moving forward? I mean, I'd make the argument that I am a firm believer in the student athlete experience. I'm a firm believer that any day on a college campus is an opportunity to make that young person better. Any day that someone graduates from a college is an opportunity to change not only their home, but possibly their street or their block where they live in, the community better, and all of those things. That argument was not made strong enough 30 years ago. We're now dealing with the repercussions of everything as a result of that. So all the time that we had to talk about all the goodness of it, I think there was maybe some lost focus in what was going on, and getting caught up on bigger and better, and whether that's a stadium or a staff or a salary or whatever that is, that led people to talk more about that as opposed to the number of first generation, second generation, third generation people that graduate from college that have an opportunity to make a real difference. Back to your original question and off my soapbox, Mark, what I would say is the more we get into this and the more it looks like a duck and quacks like a duck, it's harder and harder to get away from that employee image in trying to separate what they do. And I don't like saying what our student athletes are, from finding those lines between that and being an employee. I firmly believe in what that experience is. And I believe that in my core that what we're doing here is an unbelievably great opportunity in providing that for them. But, we need to find the right leadership that's going to get us through this and help us create, Michael, as you said, the guardrails and the proper value of what's out there, really help us figure out what's going on.
Thank you, Boo. As I mentioned before, this is unique because we have people in different shops, but we also have people in different schools across the country that are not just all Power Five. Chris, you spent some time in the Power Five, currently at Charlotte. Where do you see NIL taken into effect in regards to recruitment and the transfer portal, from maybe a standpoint of where you're at now, and then maybe from the perspective of your time at Syracuse, if you were there now?
Hey, Jesse. Yeah, it's. I think I mentioned before. In some respects, there's an advantage to being at this level because we get to learn a little bit from the folks who are moving faster with more opportunities. I also think, we were advantaged. Michael Alford mentioned it. We were advantaged by Michael Alford and Mike Hill being co-chairing that Lead One NIL committee. So I think as a G5 school, we got to jump on sort of getting our tools in place. Having been in charge of development and marketing and some of those other areas, external areas at Power Fives, I think some of those conversations are different. Some of those conversations that you're going to end up having with donors and corporate partners can lead into, for example, the definition of involvement and assistance, right? We're not supposed to match make. I can tell you though that the temptation to do that is different at a Power Five level because quite frequently you're not the one that raises that idea.
Mhm.
So I think in terms of how it's going to affect, I would tell you right now, and because of the way we started the conversation saying that we didn't really get guardrails, I would tell you that this is the most unregulated recruiting environment I've experienced. And Mark was gracious enough to mention that that was a full 30-year career. So that's a pretty long span to say this is the most unregulated environment. I think, but I think that's true. I think it's true as it relates to how schools are going to try to use this tool to try to influence recruiting. I think the portal, I'm hopeful that the portal is going to come back to some form of reality because the scary thing for a lot of the young people that are getting into the portal is they're not going to find homes. And then the next scary iteration of that is in certain sports, coaches are going to recruit high school students less because they're going to be able to go find more developed, not only more developed athletes in the portal, but in their perspective, athletes that have already burned their free transfer. So again, we're going to monitor it. We're going to stay close to it. We rolled out our program called Green Light, which is more about our philosophy of being, we want to be really forward thinking about our athletes. We're a student athlete centered organization. I want to help them in every way that I can. To me, it's an educational tool first. I do think the challenges at the Power Five level to convert it into a recruiting tool are much more intense.
Thanks, Chris. So, Eric, thinking of the future, where we're going, NIL in some regards and conference realignment can be related together. So, Eric, what do you think the impact of NIL with Texas and Oklahoma potentially coming to the SEC in a couple of years? Does that have an impact on day-to-day business, or what does that look like? Does it make the SEC a bigger playing field for people to have access to?
Like so many have mentioned, it's really hard to see where the future is going to shake out. I mean, I'll take a stab at some guesses, but I would assume with any conference changes, there's a new conference media deal. Conference media deal would assume you get more exposure. Exposure should lead to brand value. I mean, that's a formula that should improve the student athlete's value on all sports. That is, if we have all sports, those are things that we're talking about in the halls all the time. Of all of these things are just chipping away at amateurism, not chipping away. There's big chunks being taken out, and there's a light at the end of the tunnel that looks a lot like a train, that feels like it's not what any of us signed up for 23 years ago for me, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. It's just different. And we have to adjust and find our, I hate to keep saying new normal, we have to find our new normal. And that's okay. It'll be fine. We just have to find our way.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. Michael, I know that you do have to leave here a little bit early, so be cognizant of your time. You got a lot of experience. You've experienced professionally, you've experience in broadcasting, obviously collegiate athletics. We look at the TV deals that ESPN has signed with the SEC and the college football playoff. And now the NCAA is just in an odd place in general. How do all those things tie in? You know, I'm very interested in your experience in the television space. You know, does NIL, is that going to have a place in future television contracts with conferences or any schools that have their own network or anything of that nature?
I think that's the possibility, Jesse. One thing we're educating our student athletes on are performance enhanced clauses in these NIL deals. And another thing we're doing is going back and making sure we educate our coaches on how this is going to affect them. Because I use the example of a point guard in women's basketball who has a local small deal, call it $1,500 to appear at a local restaurant or something along those lines. There's going to be performance clauses typically in some of those where if she's not playing, that contract gets dropped. And let's say she turns the ball over 5 times and gets benched. And there's going to be a conversation between her and our coach, where our coaches in professional sports, it's an easy one. Coaches in collegiate athletics have not had those conversations with students. And then you get into some of the larger quarterback deals that are going on, and there's for sure going to be some performance clauses in those contracts. So I see it. We had this, funny you bring this up, we had this conversation today. I see this trickling into broadcasting a little bit. It's interesting also whether the new TV rights, if they're going to be looking at the markets or looking at the brands. We think it's going a little bit more brand. They've got the markets kind of cornered now, and they could be going more brand centric on the new rights deal. So it's an interesting dilemma or space that we're in, and who pointed out right now. And really, you're going to have to be nimble and be ready to adjust on what you're doing internally as things come up in our industry.
I'm going to follow up with a question that's a little bit off topic, but my curiosity is getting the best of me. You're knowledgeable in the space. I was reading about Notre Dame partnering with Peacock, a streaming service, and the first game's not going to be on NBC. My God, Notre Dame not on NBC. What does the future look like in that space? And you can relate it back to name, image, likeness, that'd be great, but I think I was just curious.
I think you're going to see more of it. I think you're going to see some streaming services get in our space. You may see some streaming services starting to pay for the rights. Call it a Netflix. I think Amazon has enough money to come in and get the rights to the SEC if they want it. It's going to be an interesting space, and that's something that you're constantly looking at technology and trying to figure out what's coming next, and making sure you're in position as you negotiate the rights deals, that you're in position to kind of see and be able to capitalize on the next thing. But I really see streaming getting into the media space and competing with the networks here real soon.
Thank you, Michael.
I see a question for Bobby. I want to point out, I think schools located in states with no income tax is at an advantage. We're one. We bring that up often.
How does that make you an advantage for your organization? Can you go a little more in depth about that?
It's more recruiting for our NIL students on the tax benefits, the tax implications that they're going to face in their NIL deals being a tax-free state. Just a talking point that we educated our coaches on.
And I think that's what I wanted to follow up with Terry on. Terry, as you're having conversations with student athletes, and we've talked about the education and how we implement certain things in place, are we really drilling down on, how this could affect their financial aid moving forward, cost of attendance? Are we putting them through tax courses and stuff like that? What's y'all's approach at Arkansas?
Yeah, really similar to Florida State. I mean, we along the same lines, strong partnership with our Walton College of Business, strong partnership with our Office of Entrepreneurship and Innovation, and they're really excited to take this on with us. And I guess I did in March, but the work had really started about 8 months prior to me being hired, in terms of them being involved in all of the decisions we were making about how we wanted to educate. We're actually going to begin we call it NIL for All class, our second 8 weeks of this fall semester. So we'll go October through the end of November, but yeah, each week we'll have a different topic and be taught by myself and some individuals in the Office of Entrepreneurship. And the idea is that the student athletes start with a problem in mind and then come up with a plan to solve that problem. So each week they'll be going through something different, startup junkie to tax experts to accountants and things like that. And that's a class for the student athlete that really wants to get in depth. But yeah, we have workshops and whatnot throughout the academic year. But day to day, those are conversations we're regularly having. For instance, we have a student athlete who's done quite well, full Pell recipient, and making some decisions about opportunities he wants to take, and he's done extremely well throughout the first month. But the thing we keep coming back to when he brings a different opportunity to the table is his mom's household income. She's a single parent, and he thinks he's going to still be on the team for another 2 years or so as a men's basketball student athlete, and this will affect mom next year and the year after that. So yeah, we're having those conversations in depth and making sure that our coaches are prepared, particularly for that young person that again is coming from a disadvantaged situation and is presented with 10,000 or 12,000 or 50,000, whatever the dollar amount is. It sounds enticing, but $6,400 that's not taxable, sometimes goes a lot longer than being a 1099 and maybe not having those taxes taken out by the car dealership or the restaurant or the other business. So yeah, we're having those conversations pretty regularly, and it's incumbent on them to listen, but we do remind them we can't fix things for you. We can certainly do our best to get ahead of it. We can't fix things for you as you're entering an adult arena.
For sure. Well, thank you guys for that first segment. We're opening it up now to some questions that we have from the audience. The first question is open to everybody. Let's talk about the first month and how people plan to pivot from here. Let's hear good, bad, and indifferent from all of you guys.
I can go first. I think the first month, what we've seen, there's really 3 categories of student athletes, right? There's one group that's going to be better off, right? Some of them are much better off, right? And we're talking a couple, nationally, maybe 1 or 2 at each school, but the students that are way better off. There are some who it makes no difference in their day-to-day life, right? Maybe they're still doing NIL deals, but it's a little bit of product. I mean, that's the number one thing we see as a t-shirt from Barstool or, whatever it is, where it really makes no difference day to day. And then we're also seeing a category of student athlete that Terry touched on a little bit, but ones that are actually going to be worse off, right? Maybe they make just enough money to lose that Pell Grant for the next year. Maybe they accept just enough product where when they get that 1099, they're going to be taxed on that product, that $1,000 worth of gear that they got, they're going to end up paying out of pocket for, right? And our role as an institution is to get as many kids from the last category into at minimum the middle category, right? The no harm category, and as many from that category up into the kind of life-changing difference category within the parameters of the NCAA rules.
Go ahead. I thought you might have been ready to answer that question as well. What do you think?
I was, but Jeremiah did such a good job. I don't have anything else. No, as we look at it, I think it's it's a continuous churn of communication and not allowing this to become a division between administration and coaches, and you're not doing enough. And what about this? And I heard this, and those types of things that you make sure you're leaning into it with your coaches. And they're really, to a large degree, certainly from what's going on the recruiting trail, the ones that are on the front line that are finding out what's going on and what people are talking about. And then, is it, again, I don't know what the hell the rules are. So, is it better to, make sure that the people at the school that are currently enrolled here have opportunities with NIL, or is it better to talk about it with recruits? As these could be potential opportunities you have. I always feel like we're in the referral business, right? And the recruiting decision is going to be made at 2:00 in the morning when they're sitting in a room with someone else and they look at it and say, hey, what's it really like? Tell me what this experience really is all about. And that's, to a large degree, what NIL is. We're just kind of, again, doing everything we can to educate, doing everything we can to tie in with our entrepreneurial school, and doing everything we can to tie in education. I was thinking earlier, we used to do these caravans. If you're in the South, you do these caravans with all the donors, and the compliance person always got up and talked for 15 minutes about all the things you can't do. Now you can probably do all of those things, and the compliance person is the most popular person in the room. So, it's just a continuing process of trying to figure out what the world's going on.
Eric, what about you from the marketing side of this industry? How has it been for you in the first month?
It's been fine. We've really been focusing on education and process, like a lot of people have been talking about. We have 3 outfits that we deal with: Compass, influencers for them to build their own brand. Compass is for declaration of their deals, and then Altius is our own consulting that consults the administration and student athletes. I think it started fine. I think if it maintains momentum through the fall and the beginning of games, we would be ecstatic. And personally, I just hope it doesn't get in the way of what they really want to do, which is play sports, win games, and get an education. If they can make a couple bucks on the side or make a lot of bucks, that's great. But I hope they don't go down a path of chasing the dollar and step over dollars to pick up pennies.
Yeah, and to that point, I think that was something I thought about. That was a personal concern, right? Athletics is already a full-time job on top of being a student, and then on top of being an athlete. There's already so many distractions in college. Chris, I guess I'd ask you, for your student athlete population, not a Power 5 school, but also in Charlotte with other distraction as well. What do you think that'll look like for your student athletes moving forward, and how do you keep them reeled in?
Jesse, I think one of the things we are excited about is Charlotte's a great marketplace, and there's a lot of opportunities for our student athletes to grow in a lot of ways as a result of being in Charlotte. We've got great relationships with not only corporations, but pro teams in the market. So there are opportunities, and we want, again, it's an educational model for us to backtrack a little bit. I think as we did all our diligence to try to find the right platforms, and Eric touched on this, the platforms you're really looking for were education, monitoring, and disclosure at the first point, because none of us really knew what it was going to look like after that. I very quickly arrived at the conclusion that there is no one, there's no third party out there that's a complete solution right now. And how could there be? Because they didn't know what the rules were going to be either. I think there's going to be very clear phases in this. And, the first phase was making sure your student athletes had all the tools. The second phase is the chaos phase right now that we're all in, trying to figure out what does it mean when people start doing deals. We're not supposed to be matchmakers, so how do we stay in line? But then the next phase, and I've got a quiet wager with one of the people in this space that less than 20% of the student athlete population who has earned enough to file taxes, that less than 20% of them will in fact file taxes next year in the spring. And the same, I think, is going to be true when we all look at how many student athletes actually absorbed our education. And that's where I give Terry credit, because if you're taking it another step and actually putting them in a classroom, I think there could be some real value to that. Because if you're just trusting them to go through video modules, good luck. I think we're going to know so much more when we get to the spring. So that's phase 3. And then you're going to need human people to deal with the questions that these student athletes have. You're not going to be able to hide behind a computer program. So I think this is going to be phased in. Hopefully, for all of our sakes, somewhere on that continuum, we're going to get the guardrails that we talked about early on. So there's some sort of a level playing field, even if it's just borderlines that are sent by conferences. It might have to happen by conferences before we get. I can tell you, Jeremiah mentioned this, but we're the only business in the country that could inspire a 9-0 ruling from the Supreme Court. We're the only one. There is no other one. So there is no chance of federal legislation coming to the rescue. We can all forget about that. That's not an option, in my view.
Thank you, Chris.
Thanks, Chris. Hey, Terry, I noticed you had your hand raised. Did you want to piggyback on something?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to kind of echo what I've heard, across the board. I think we just had to speak to teams and student athletes, and I'm one of the same now with our compliance staff. So we just came from football right before we got on this call, right? Because it's report day and they start tomorrow, and we had to hit them hard with their normal beginning of the year compliance meeting. But a lot of it were the thou shalt nots, if you will, and kind of feels that way. But more so telling them, hey, we're here as a resource. We want you to take advantage of us, ask us questions. My phone's blowing up from the businesses and relationships with donors that I've had in this state. And so that's the hard thing about not facilitating, right? Is not giving the donor a name or the business owner a name of a student athlete they should pick and making them work a little bit harder for it. But more so, I think that's been the biggest thing we've seen over the first month, that it's been crazy here. We're a smaller community, but it's a vibrant business region as well. But I'm actually really, really curious to see how things go once we actually get into the season, right? Once football gets going, once fans are coming to men's basketball games and baseball games and the whole nine, but more so nervous about what happens when one of these young people that's being courted for something or signs on to something loses a game for us, right? And doesn't have something go their way and in the right direction of the program. Probably have a little bit more concern there, more so for the mental health of the student athlete. Right. And so I think that's been the biggest thing, in making sure we have enough foresight to plan ahead and get with our mental health staff and get with academic counselors and making sure that they know, and athletic trainers and the whole nine. And those that have the most day-to-day contact with the student athlete understand that this is something else that's being added into the student athlete experience. And so, our young people are probably going to start talking about things with those people once we actually get into the season, right? And summertime's it's been slow. It's been easy to talk about the different things nationally that student athletes have done. But once we get into that playing season, I think just keeping an eye on the mental health of the student athlete is probably where I've spent
number one
this first month.
Terry, I think you brought up a lot of good points, and obviously we could continue this conversation for hours, which we're going to do offline with each other anyway. And I think that brings up a good point of something that you said. One of the reasons that we're doing this panel is to have these conversations and educate, because we're all in the same space and we need to work together, whether it's internally or with our peers across conferences. And I think that's why it's important to have open dialogue. So with that being said, I can't thank you all enough for taking your time out of your busy schedule as we lead up to the fall to be on this panel. I'd like to thank Madison for all of her hard work that she has done, and thank you for moderating. Mark, thank you for building this and allowing me to be a part of it. So I certainly appreciate that. And there is more to come, and I'll kick that over to Mark.
Awesome. Thank you much. First, I want to thank our entire it's been quite a journey to you first time have connected, but this journey to build the show has been truly remarkable. And from the bottom of our hearts here Breaking Through, we are truly appreciative of every last one of you guys. Huge shout out to my team. Jesse, thank you so much for coming along with us. Madison, thank you for all the hard work and the marketing side of things that you've done for us. Please stay tuned to us. We have another show coming up focused on ADs and playoff expansion, conference realignment, and then also a segment on universe management and ethics working in money. So you guys stay tuned as we go. Thank you for reporting as always.